Henry Ford didn't just build cars, he built one of the most dangerous hate campaigns in American history, and his ideas influenced one of the darkest chapters the world has ever seen. Most people know Henry Ford as the genius behind the Model T, the man who put America on wheels and changed manufacturing forever. But there's another side to his story that rarely gets talked about. Between building his car empire, Ford spent years spreading hate through newspapers, funding propaganda, and inspiring some of the worst people in history. This isn't just about bad opinions from a different time. This is about a billionaire who used his money and power to spread ideas that led to real violence. And the scary part? A lot of people have no idea this even happened. Henry Ford was born in 1863 on a farm in Michigan. He hated farming. While other kids were learning about crops and livestock, Ford was obsessed with machines. By the time he was in his 30s, he had built his first gasoline-powered car. In 1903, he founded the Ford Motor Company, and by 1908, the Model T rolled off the assembly line. The Model T changed everything. Before Ford, cars were expensive toys for rich people. Ford wanted to build a car that regular workers could afford. He revolutionized manufacturing with the assembly line, making production faster and cheaper. By 1918, half of all cars in America were Model Ts. Ford became one of the richest men in the world. He also did something that seemed pretty progressive for the time. In 1914, he started paying his workers $5 a day, which was more than double what most factory workers made. People called it the $5 day, and workers rushed to get jobs at Ford's factories. On the surface, Ford looked like a hero to the working class. But here's the thing about Henry Ford. He didn't pay his workers more because he was generous. He did it because the work on his assembly lines was brutal and repetitive, and people kept quitting. The higher wage kept workers from leaving. Ford was smart about business, but he wasn't the kind and caring boss people thought he was. And as his wealth grew, so did his influence. That's when things started to get really dark. In 1918, Ford bought a small newspaper called the Dearborn Independent. It was a local paper that nobody really paid attention to, but Ford had big plans for it. Within a year, he turned it into a machine for spreading his personal beliefs, and those beliefs were filled with hate. Starting in 1920, the Dearborn Independent began publishing a series of articles called The International Jew, The World's Problem. Every single week for 91 straight weeks, the paper published articles blaming Jewish people for pretty much everything Ford thought was wrong with the world. According to Ford's paper, Jewish people controlled banks, they controlled the media, they were responsible for World War I, they were destroying American values, they were behind jazz music, short skirts, and anything else Ford didn't like about modern society. These weren't just opinion pieces. Ford presented his articles as fact. He claimed to have evidence. He referenced documents and statistics. Of course, most of it was either completely made up or twisted beyond recognition, but that didn't matter to the people reading it. Ford was rich and powerful. People trusted him, and Ford made sure as many people as possible saw these articles. He didn't just sell the paper, he gave it away for free. Every Ford dealership in America, and there were thousands of them, was required to hand out copies of the Dearborn Independent to customers. At its peak, the paper had a circulation of about 900,000 copies. That's almost 1 million people reading Ford's hate every single week. One of the main sources Ford used for his articles was a book called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This book claimed to be the secret minutes from meetings where Jewish leaders supposedly planned to take over the world. It described a Jewish conspiracy to control governments, economies, and the media. There was just one problem. The book was completely fake. It was written by Russian secret police in the early 1900s to stir up hatred against Jewish people. By the time Ford started using it, multiple investigations had already proven it was a fraud. Courts in Switzerland, Germany, and other countries had declared it a forgery, but Ford didn't care. He published articles based on the protocols anyway, and he used his influence to spread it across America. Ford even compiled his articles into a 4-volume book set called The International Jew, and it was translated into at least 16 different languages. Millions of copies were distributed around the world. In Germany, the book became incredibly popular in the 1920s. And guess what? A man named Adolf Hitler read it, and he loved it. This is where Ford's hate campaign crosses from being just awful to being historically catastrophic. Adolf Hitler was a huge fan of Henry Ford. In his office, Hitler kept a life-size portrait of Ford on his wall. In his book, Mein Kampf, Hitler praised Ford as an inspiration. He specifically mentioned Ford's idea about Jewish people and called him a fighter against Jewish influence. Ford's book, The International Jew, became required reading in German schools under the Nazi regime. The Nazis printed more than 500,000 copies and distributed them throughout Germany. Nazi leaders openly praised Ford. In 1938, on Ford's 75th birthday, the German government awarded him the Grand Cross of the German Eagle, the highest honor Nazi Germany gave to foreigners. Ford accepted it. He didn't just accept it quietly either. There's a photo of him receiving the medal from German officials at a ceremony in Detroit. By this point, the Nazis had already started persecuting Jewish people. The Nuremberg laws had stripped Jewish citizens of their rights. Violence against Jewish communities was increasing. The world was watching as Germany descended into fascism, and Henry Ford accepted an award from them. After World War II, when the full horror of the Holocaust became public, people wanted to know how something so evil could have happened. During the Nuremberg trials, where Nazi leaders were prosecuted for war crimes, Baldur von Schirach, the leader of the Hitler Youth, testified that he became anti-Semitic after reading Henry Ford's The International Jew as a young man. He specifically blamed Ford's book for influencing his beliefs. Let that sink in for a second. A man who helped lead Nazi Germany said that American businessman's book was part of what radicalized him. So the big question is, why? Why would someone with so much success, so much money, and so much influence spend years spreading hate? Some historians point to Ford's upbringing. He grew up in rural Michigan with a very traditional Christian household. He believed in old-fashioned values and was suspicious of anything modern or urban. As America changed in the early 1900s, as cities grew and culture shifted, Ford felt like the world he knew was disappearing. And like a lot of people throughout history, he looked for someone to blame. Ford also had a strange obsession with control. He controlled his factories with an iron fist. He hired a private security force to spy on his workers and make sure they weren't joining unions. He wanted to control what his employees did, even outside of work. He believed he knew what was best for everyone. When the world didn't match his vision, he needed an explanation. Anti-Semitic conspiracy theories gave him that explanation. Some people argue that Ford wasn't really anti-Semitic, that he was just influenced by the common prejudices of his time. But that argument falls apart pretty quickly. Plenty of people in the 1920s weren't publishing weekly hate articles. Plenty of wealthy businessmen weren't funding international propaganda campaigns. Ford made a choice. He spent millions of dollars spreading hate. He knew what he was doing. Ford's anti-Semitic campaign didn't go unchallenged. Jewish communities and organizations spoke out against him. Several lawsuits were filed against Ford and his newspaper. One of the most significant was by Aaron Shapiro, a Jewish lawyer and businessman who Ford's paper had attacked in a series of articles. Shapiro sued Ford for defamation in 1925. The trial was a disaster for Ford. He was forced to testify, and his lawyer struggled to defend the claims made in the Dearborn Independent. As the trial went on, it became clear that Ford couldn't prove any of his accusations. Facing mounting legal pressure and bad publicity, Ford's lawyers pushed him to settle. In 1927, Ford issued an apology. Well, sort of. In a statement released to the press, Ford claimed he had no idea what was being published in his own newspaper. He said he was too busy running his car company to pay attention to the Dearborn Independent. He apologized for any hurt caused by the articles and shut down the paper. But here's the thing, almost nobody believed he was sincere. Ford owned the paper. He funded it. His name was on it. To claim he didn't know what was being published for 7 straight years was ridiculous. Many historians believe Ford only apologized because he was losing the lawsuit and because his anti-Semitism was starting to hurt his business. Jewish groups had organized boycotts of Ford cars and sales were dropping. Even after the apology, Ford's actions suggested he hadn't really changed. He continued to associate with anti-Semitic figures. He accepted that Nazi medal in 1938, 11 years after his supposed apology. His personal writings and private conversations, according to people who knew him, showed he still held the same beliefs. The apology was damage control, nothing more. Henry Ford died in 1947 at the age of 83. By then, the world has seen the Holocaust. 6 million Jewish people had been murdered. The ideas Ford had spent years promoting had contributed to the climate of hate that made the Holocaust possible. Today, the Ford Motor Company has tried to distance itself from Henry Ford's anti-Semitism. The company has issued apologies and has worked with Jewish organizations. The Ford family, who still has influence over the company, has also made efforts to acknowledge and condemn Henry Ford's actions. But the damage was done. Ford's books are still circulated by hate groups today. Neo-Nazis and white supremacists still quote from The International Jew. His legacy of hate lives on in corners of the internet and in extremist movements around the world. The story of Henry Ford is a reminder of something important. Success doesn't equal morality. Just because someone is good at business or innovation doesn't mean they're a good person. Ford revolutionized manufacturing and made cars affordable for millions of people. He also used his wealth and platform to spread dangerous hatred and influence genocidal regimes. It's also a reminder of how dangerous it is when powerful people spread misinformation and hate. Ford had money, influence, and the trust of millions of Americans. He used those things to legitimize conspiracy theories and prejudice. People believed him because he was successful. They thought that if he was smart enough to build a car empire, he must be right about other things too. We see echoes of this today. Billionaires with massive platforms can spread ideas, true or false, to millions of people instantly. When people with power and influence push conspiracy theories or scapegoat groups of people, it has real consequences. History shows us where that patch leads. In the end, Henry Ford built an empire, but he also built a legacy of hate that contributed to one of the darkest periods in human history. His story isn't just a historical footnote. It's a warning about what happens when prejudice meets power and money. The Model T changed how we travel, but Ford's anti-Semitism helped shape the ideology behind the Holocaust. We can't erase what Ford did, but we can learn from it. We can recognize the danger of letting powerful people spread hate without consequences. We can push back against conspiracy theories and misinformation, and we can remember that a person's achievements don't excuse their failures as a human being. If this video showed you anything new, feel free to like and subscribe.